refers to close encounters in which abductions occur or direct communication, contact occurs. And our speaker is Phillip Imbrogno, who is chairman of the science department at Windward High School in White Plains, New York. Phil is an amateur astronomer, a field investigator for the Center for UFO Studies, and co-author with Dr. J. Allen Hynek of the book Night Siege, The Hudson Valley Mystery. Phil is a member of the board of directors for Bowman Observatory in Greenwich, Connecticut, and he was advisor for the HBO special entitled UFOs, What's Going On? He was also consultant to Group W Westinghouse TV in their presentation of Into the Unknown, which had a segment on the Hudson Valley UFO mystery. Phil's writing has appeared in the Journal of UFO Studies and International UFO Reporter. Please welcome Phil Imbrogno.
What I would like to do is at first give you an update on what has happened in the Hudson Valley since the publication of my book Night Siege. And there's quite a bit going on. There are sightings that are still continuing in the Hudson Valley, although not to the epidemic extent that it has in the past. Some bits of information. Just before the publication of Night Siege, I received a letter from Lieutenant Colonel Bennett from the Air Force advising me that I was going to be contacted by the Air Force in regards to numerous FOIA requests that I made to the FAA concerning activity of strange unknown objects over the Hudson Valley. In October of 1987, I really didn't know how they were going to contact me. I received a phone call from a Major Andrews from Burlington, Massachusetts, whose official title is the Air Force's representative to the FAA. We had a cordial 45-minute conversation. As a matter of fact, it was his nickel, so I was just going to see what other information he had. And after about a half an hour, I was ready to hang up, but he continued to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. He informed me that the Air Force was very concerned about UFO sightings in the Hudson Valley. Their main concern was that they did not want to start a UFO panic. Quote, they were afraid that if numerous books would hit the market indicating and convincing the public that UFOs were real, that they would receive too many phone calls regarding UFO encounters, and they weren't ready to handle that. He told me that a number of reports had been forwarded to his office, and he had just taken the job about 6 months before the phone conversation. One interesting thing is that he said to me, well, I have a file full of reports and documents. Can I Xerox them and send them to you? He said, fine. He said, I'm going to go through a few of them for a while here. And he mentioned, oh, wait a minute now. He said, these reports aren't here. He said, they were signed over to NORAD out in Boulder, Colorado. And they concerned UFO activity over the Hudson Valley. And he says, also, there's numerous memos from the FAA to the Air Force asking what to do about UFOs. Now, he sent me a folder of information. Most of it was letters and communication between FAA representatives and Air Force representatives regarding UFOs. Nothing really, enlightening or extraordinary about the letters. But there was one thing in there. In the file cabinet was a letter regarding a sighting in Tennessee, which was written to my co-author of Night Siege, Bob Pratt. The letter was sent from a woman from Kentucky who was in the sighting area when a UFO came over a highway, projected down a beam of light, and these police officers were involved. Now, I called Bob Pratt, who lives down in Florida, and I said, well, I got all of this information from the Air Force. They were very cordial. I said, there's even a letter written to you, a copy. He goes, well, what letter? And I said, began to read the letter and who it was from, and he said, I never got that letter. The letter was dated for 1973, so I sent him a copy. So how did the Air Force, especially up there in Burlington, Massachusetts, get a copy of a letter that was written to Bob Pratt down in Florida when he was working for the Enquirer, and he never received it regarding a UFO encounter in Kentucky? And today we're still kind of wondering how the Air Force got that information. Now, I want to give an update on the Hudson Valley sightings. Then I want to talk about some cases that have been brought to my attention involving what's been called, I guess now, contact of the fourth kind or abductions, or whatever you would like to refer to. And I was very, very surprised that as the years went on from 1984, that I was approached by literally dozens of people who think that they've had more than a UFO sighting. So what I would like to do is go to the slides now, and we'll start from there. After my presentation, I'll answer any questions, providing time permits. And I think we're ready to go. I think we need to be, I can focus it. There we go. Okay, this is the cover of the book, The Hudson Valley UFO Sightings. Originally, we tried to title it The Hudson Valley UFO Mystery, but the publisher liked Sightings better, so they had the last word in the matter. And it documents a series of sightings that have been taking place in the Hudson Valley, but the title is misleading since many of the encounters took field in Litchfield, New Haven, Rockland counties, and it encompassed an area that extended all the way from Hartford, all the way up to Albany, down through Pennsylvania, and down to New Jersey. And what has been described is a boomerang-shaped object the size of a football field hovering over major highways, witnessed by up to date about 4,000 or 5,000 people. And, well, we have, quite a bit of documentation on this. And what's happened now is that this video is was taken July 24th, 1984 in Brewster, New York, and I'm sure most of you've seen it, and I have a copy that I'm going to present to you today. Well, it was taken July 24th, 1984 at about 10:20 p.m., and what it shows is a series of lights. And this particular UFO was witnessed by hundreds of people. The same night this video was taken, the object was reported hovering over the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which is documented in my book also. Now, one thing that surprised me quite a bit, this object was said to be the size of 3 football fields. As a matter of fact, the guards at Indian Point, who are New York State Power Authority police officers, ex-state police, said this thing was 900 feet from end to end, and it hovered above reactor number 3, and it was a solid object with structure. Now, the Indian Point complex confirms the sighting, which is probably the first time in history that a UFO was confirmed over a nuclear power plant. Yet, it was played down so much by a number of different agencies is that the incident is just about all but forgotten. Except the video remains. Now, many skeptics were saying that this video represented a series of ultralight aircraft flying within 6 inches from wingtip to wingtip. The wind gusted to 35 knots this night. One thing we wanted to know, does this series of lights represent one solid object or individual objects? To make a long story short, we made an acquaintance with someone. When I say we, I say Peter Gersten and myself. For those of you who don't know Peter's work in the UFO field, he's a criminal lawyer in Peekskill, New York, who has went to some extent bringing the government to court to force them to release documents. We made an acquaintance of a fellow who was a friend, a personal friend with Dr. Lou Allen of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He agreed to send Lou Allen the tape to have their experts look at it. For those of you who aren't familiar with JPL, it is the top imaging laboratory in the country that our government operates. Now, they did the imaging for the Voyager spacecraft, Viking spacecraft, and so on. In 1985, one scientist from the JPL also looked at this tape and could not identify it. The tape was sent to Dr. Lou Allen of JPL. And we got this letter back, stating that they feel, we would guess that the object is one solid object, a rigid object. This is in direct contrast, this is in direct disagreement to claims by skeptics such as Phil Klass that videotape is nothing more than a bunch of planes flying in formation. The top imaging scientists of the country looking at the tape feel that it's one solid object, one rigid object. Yet, Phil Klass can look at the tape and say, yeah, those are planes. I can even tell you what type of aircraft they are, Cessnas. Okay, on October 29th, 1987, my research team, and I have about 6 or 7 people who research with me on a regular basis, investigating the Hudson Valley sightings. No one person could have carried out the investigation and documentation that's in Night Siege. We were doing some field work on October 29th at about 8:30 on Highway 84, just outside of Kent, New York. While driving up there, of course, our intentions were, well, what if we're going to see the UFO tonight? Well, we had no idea that we were going to have a sighting that night. This is Highway 84, going through Dutchess County, where Kent, New York is, around exit 1617. And it's been the subject of it's been the area of many, many UFO sightings. Now, as we were driving up that way, we had 4 separate cars. We were all in contact by CB radio. And as we approached this position here, one member of our team was already up there. He had stopped his car and he was looking at some lights. I got out of my car and looked at the lights. There were a bar of lights and it was coming straight for us from the north. It was about several miles away, very bright, intense lights, very, very close together. I got on the radio and alerted the members of my team who were about 2 or 3 miles down the road that we see something very, very strange. And of course that caused much excitement. What we saw was a series of lights that looked something like this. As the lights approached us, it stopped and all of a sudden went sideways, and it was moving parallel to us, maybe about a mile away, very bright, just touching the hills, and very low. And when when its back was to us, we saw this type of light arrangement in the sky. It looked like a Christmas tree in the sky. So I radio, and I said, well, we got something here. And I said to a fellow researcher of mine, Fred Dennis, I said, Fred, we got something strange here, and it's heading your way. We saw the object pass in between those trees in that little valley there, and it continued to move towards the east. Okay, it continued to pass over those trees, no sound, very, very large, and it passed behind this ridge, so I could no longer see it. So I'm radioing down to two other cars indicating that something was heading their way. One car responded saying they saw it, and they couldn't even give words. It's large, it's well lit, we got binoculars on it, we see structure. It's passing right over the highway, right over our heads. So Fred, who's about another 2 miles down the road, is going, what do you see? What do you see? Is it heading my way? And he looks up to the sky and doesn't see anything. The object continued to pass behind this ridge and continued to head down towards Fred, who was 3 miles down east of me. And now Fred was about in this position here on the highway. And I said to Fred, Fred, it's heading in your direction. He looks up into the sky and sees one small plane in the distance going. He goes, what are you guys, nuts or something? He says, I just see this plane over there. All of a sudden his radio went quiet. And we're calling him. There's no response. And all of a sudden he says, I see it, it's enormous, it's coming over, it's enormous, I got to get my binoculars. He turned his binoculars on this particular object from about this position as it was passing over the ridges. And his field of view in the binoculars is about 500 feet at 1,000 yards. Yet this particular object spilled out of the field of view of the binoculars. That's how large it was. This is something like he saw. He reported that he saw solid bars of light, but the angle that he was looking at probably allowed a lot of the lights to fuse into one. So the object, whatever it was, no one reported any sound, continued to drift towards the east. So it's traveling eastbound, and we're facing westbound. So we go down the road, get on the Taconic Highway to go around to go on 84 to try to see where it's going down to the east, because it was heading towards Danbury. So we're heading east, and all of a sudden we see it coming from the west, going back to the west. So we stopped our cars and get out and saw it disappear in this direction, going west towards New Bergen. And in the distance, we saw this red mass of lights, just moving very, very slowly in the distance. We know that the object appeared in Danbury and circled around the area and hovered, was seen by quite a few people, and many people said it did hover. And then it circled back. To us, it moved very slow. But according to our calculations, from the time we saw it and the time it appeared in Danbury, it would have had to be moving several hundred miles an hour. To us, it looked like it was just moving very, very slow. The UFO sightings are getting so common that people are putting out welcome signs. Also, there's been quite a few sightings and an unusual phenomenon is happening. That people are joining in groups, people who have had past sightings, they're joining in groups and going out to areas where they've had seen UFOs before, or where UFOs have been reported to appear. This one area down on Route 312 in Lake Carmel, next to a reservoir, has been a favorite site of these UFO watchers. Now, usually they congregate out here. What's that?
It says 301 on the...
Yeah, 301. That's right. It's 312 and 301 on the thing. This is the 301 crossover and intersects with 312. And this particular area is a reservoir, and it's in Lake Carmel, and a number of people have been going down there to watch the skies to see if they can see something strange. And it reminded me of the scene from Close Encounters where the UFO appeared in the area and all these people were hanging out on the hills waiting for something to appear. This is exactly what was going on. It wasn't only this area. It was areas from Danbury all the way out to Milltown, Connecticut, people congregating in groups and having this like secret brother and sisterhood and telling stories about seeing the UFO. So I went down there one night, incognito. It was dark. I started asking people, well, do you see anything here? And somebody was telling me, yeah, something came out of the reservoir, something hovered over the reservoir. Here are all these amazing stories about past encounters they're having. People who said, well, I never thought about this UFO stuff. No, I've had 3 sightings in the last 2 years. I mean, so something's got to be happening. So I went around asking a bunch of questions, and then the people started looking at me strange. I guess there was even a rumor going around that I was a government agent down there trying to find out what's going on. But this is one particular area where people, as a matter of fact, so many people were accumulating there and having experiences down there and sightings that the Carmel police had to come and break people up from time to time. This is part of the reservoir area. It's quite an large reservoir, and it's a pretty nice area. And the stars are really beautiful at night down there. It's really dark. This is a series of lights that was photographed from that reservoir area one night. Some drawings of triangular objects that have been reported very, very high in the sky. And now, this leads to an update on recent sightings. This is a photograph of an area just outside of Southbury, Connecticut, around exit 15 on 84. And in the past, the state of Connecticut has been an area of few UFO reports. But since 1985, the counties of Fairfield and Litchfield and Hartford have seen a dramatic rise in the number of UFO reports. This UFO is being described as a boomerang shape, a semicircle, and even more incredible, people are reporting once again that this object is at least the size of a football field, minimum. Now, in 1983, most of these sightings took place and centered themselves around the Hudson Valley area, around Westchester County and Putnam counties. But for some unknown reason, this giant boomerang-shaped UFO has shifted its activities from New York to nearby Connecticut. The most recent sightings took place on May 26th of this year, right around Interstate 84, on one of the most heavily traveled interstates in the Northeast. Between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m., more than 200 people phoned local and state police to report a huge object with bright lights and flying low over the highway near the towns of Newtown and Southbury, Connecticut. Those witnesses that called the state police in Southbury were told that it was nothing more than a group of ultralight aircraft from Candlewood Airport flying in close formation and hanging colored lanterns from the bottom of the plane. That's the truth. The police also told witnesses that the aircraft were painted black so that all they could see were the lights. Some of the witnesses to the phenomena found it very hard to believe the official explanation. One witness to the UFO, who lives in Middlebury, said the object hovered right over her house without a sound for over 2 minutes. There was no doubt in her mind that she was looking at one solid object. Her husband was a Navy air pilot. He also saw the object. He said, quote, "It was one craft, and like no aircraft that I ever seen in my life." Another witness to this series of sightings was a Mr. Randy Edding, who was a commercial airline pilot with over 30 years of experience. Mr. Edding said, quote, "That idea of ultralight theory is the prattling of idiots." Mr. Edding observed the lights from his home in Newtown, Connecticut at about 9:45 p.m. He said, there were at least 8 lights of different colors flying very close together and without a sound. As the object passed over as near his home, he observed it with a pair of 7 by 35 binoculars. Mr. Edding told me that the UFO was one object and he saw some type of heat waves coming from the object which distorted the area around the lights. Mr. Edding watched the object with neighbors and his son for over 10 minutes as it slowly drifted to the northeast. All the witnesses agreed that the UFO was one solid object and round in appearance. While the Edding party was observing the UFO, it was passing close to I-84. At this time, over a dozen cars pulled over to view the UFO as it passed overhead. One witness described what happened that night, and this is a quote from a telephone conversation. It was about 9:30 or so. I was driving east on 84 around the Southbury area when I noticed these lights ahead of me. They were low, and it looked like a 747 was going to land on the highway. This thing had about 10 lights in kind of a half circle, and the lights were yellow, green, blue, and white, and red. This thing was going very slow and moving from east to west. All of a sudden, everyone on both sides of the road began slamming on their brakes and pulling over to the side. It was a dangerous thing to do, since there were several trucks apparently trying to do the same thing. I pulled over and watched the thing pass directly over the westbound lanes. I saw a dark mass behind the lights, and there was no sound. I saw the lights of a state trooper just ahead of me, and I figured he was called to see what was going on. Then all of a sudden, this thing gets real bright. I mean, all the lights just got 10 times brighter for about 10 seconds. Then they just faded to where they were before, which was about as bright as the plane wing lights. He said, that really scared me. I wanted to get going because I thought this was some type of invasion or something I just wanted to get home. Besides, I was afraid some trucker would go plowing into my car. I watched it head east and lost it. I turned on the radio for news. I didn't hear anything about the UFOs from any local stations. Now, what they saw, in June, I believe, I received a photograph in the mail in a sighting account from an individual who identified himself in law enforcement in the area, who was on 84, who took this picture. This is a high-resolution black and white picture of the UFO that appeared in Southbury. Now, we'll go on because there's a color. I made this black and white version, a high-resolution film. Here's a close-up.
Looks like ultralights to me.
Yeah, that, I guess so. It's amazing, isn't it? Here's the color photograph. Once again, this particular photograph is being looked at by a number of people, and Dr. McAbee looked at it, and Dr. Willie Smith, and all had interesting things to say about the lights having a distinct pattern to them in color, and the different, the way the lights are presented. As far as we know, there were numerous people who reported this. The photographer is not seeking any publicity. And as far as I can see, there's no indication that this is a fraud. This is a duplicate from a negative, by the way. What was sent to me was a negative. And it's probably one of the best time night UFO pictures. I'll read to you the witness's account as he took the picture. This particular UFO photo, I believe, is one of the best nighttime UFO photos. Okay. If I can get my papers together, it'll be fine. The UFO was so bright that night and so large, I felt it was only a matter of time before someone would come forward with a photograph of something. We were contacted by a person of high standing in the South Barry area who took a picture of an object as it moved very slowly over I-84 at 9:30 p.m. The photographer wishes to remain anonymous since his position is very sensitive. He is a highly trained, college-educated man who fears that the publicity surrounding this particular photograph might hurt his career. We'll call him David, and he gave me a full account of what he saw. And okay. David was on I-84 on official business when he saw the lights. The lights were in the northwest and heading east. As he watched, the object tilted and all the lights got much brighter. Once again, it's a confirmation from other witnesses stating that this object all of a sudden got very, very bright. The object tilted and all the lights got much brighter. He was pulled off the side of the road at the time and had his camera ready. The UFO was about 45 degrees above the horizon. Through the traffic, he had time only to take one picture, or that's what he says. His camera was a 35 millimeter with a 50 millimeter lens at 1.8. The film type was Kodacolor 400, and the exposure was about 1/60th or 125th of a second. He was not sure of the setting, but feels it was 1/60th of a second. The object then moved towards the east without a sound. During an interview with this researcher, David told me that he was sure that there was one solid object behind the lights. He also said that when the object turned, it looked like the lights on the sides were pulling out from the main mass, but he realized that this effect was due to the object changing position from his point of view. Okay, now, a rational explanation. Well, I really don't have none. If this isn't a hoax, it's something very strange. And we have confirmation from many, many witnesses in the area that this is what they saw. Now, what about the theory that the UFO is nothing more than ultralights from Candlewood Airport? We questioned the state police on this theory. An officer stated they had made a mistake about the airport. It wasn't Candlewood, but Stormville Airport. Once again. And we had called a flight instructor at Stormville, and he told us that there was only one ultralight aircraft at Stormville, and it flies only in the day, since it's illegal for them to fly at night. The UFO sightings in the Northeast continue. In the days to follow, I received several calls from witnesses who saw formations of military helicopters in the sighting area. One witness took a picture of this formation. Is the government involved in the mysterious happenings over in Connecticut? Many of the witnesses feel they are. I called nearby Bradley International Airport to find out if they had any information about the sightings. I was informed by an air traffic controller that no formations or large aircraft were tracked on radar at that location in time. I was also told that unless the aircraft have transponders, a device placed in the aircraft that helped them identify them in radar, most likely they would not pick them up at an altitude of 2,000 feet. Okay, the initial calculations on the size of this object are rough right now, but we're looking at an object that's probably between 600 and 1,000 feet across. And it's a little faint. This is a close-up on some of the lights. The lights have a distinct pattern, red, 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 blue, green, or something of that nature. A close-up on some of the lights. Now, this is a negative of the object, and I bring it to your attention because if you look in the center going back, you'll see that there's a slight reflection there. And that's on the original also, and many people seem to feel that that's some type of structure in the center. This is a photograph of military helicopters that were seen in the sighting area shortly after this photograph was taken. Now, ever since the publication of Night Siege, there have been numerous overflights of what is undoubtedly aircraft in the Hudson Valley. These aircraft are flying almost on a regular basis. Some people are reporting them as UFOs. Others are identifying them as planes. On 3 occasions, I have seen these planes flying in formation, and to me, they appear to be military-type formations, very skilled pilots with very, very precision-type aircraft. Now, one thing, there have been several people with binoculars who were able to identify the shape of these planes. On 2 occasions, these planes were tracked going to Stewart Airfield in Newburgh. We got the pattern of the plane, and we sent them to a number of people. One, a professional pilot who used to fly military operations, and another, a retired commercial pilot who flew everything from Cessnas to 747s. When they looked at the design of the craft from the drawings that we had from individual witnesses, type of fuselage, and etc., they said, it looks like an O2, and we had confirmation from 2 sources. An O2 is an aircraft produced by Cessna, precision-type aircraft that was used by the CIA over Vietnam. And it can go long range, it has high stability, and now I even hear they have a newer version, which is computer-controlled. They're camouflaged in color. They carry they don't carry regulation lighting on them. I went up to Stewart Airfield, and I don't have all the slides. They're being looked at by a number of people. I went onto the base and found that the Air National Guard is there, the Air Force is there, and some other agencies are there too. I found a restricted area on the base. Now the restricted area, it encompassed a flight line, hangars, and a number of buildings. And there was an obvious warning sign not to go. As a matter of fact, one particular person who I talked to, who was a radio personality in the Newburgh area, said just by accident, when he first was new to the area, he tried to take a shortcut home to walk through Stewart and accidentally went into this area and was arrested and interrogated for over an hour and a half. After a half an hour, he was confronted by military personnel and people who acted military that were in civilian clothes that grilled him about his involvement there and why he went there. In less than 20 minutes, they had a complete computer printout on who he was, where he was, you know, his age, last time he went to the bathroom, I don't know. So, with the idea that these overflights over the Hudson Valley are occurring from some type of aircraft, and the only purpose of these overflights could be to fake UFO sightings or to discredit UFO sightings. And with this idea that the type of aircraft seen is possibly this O2 used by the CIA, I filed an FOIA to the CIA asking about their activities involving aircraft of this nature from Stewart, and was faced with the following letter. Here I'm asking about the activities of the CIA, and in the letter I stated asking about the idea about aircraft and what purpose they are, and the response I get, which comes down to a long letter, which is a whole bunch of mumbo-jumbo, and I'll read it to you here. It says, therefore your request is denied under FOI exception, so-and-so, so-and-so. An explanation of these are as follows. And I filed the FOI request. What this tells me is that the CIA is there. They've got some type of activity out of Stewart, that's some type of operation in the Hudson Valley. They're not saying what they're doing, and they're not going to tell me what they're doing. And the reason why they're denying me documents or information is because of the old, this has to go down a little bit. Okay. It's up on top, and it's because of national security. So whatever is going on, it involves overflights of these planes that could be the product of CIA or other agencies very close to them. It involves Stewart Airfield and some operation out of there that they refuse to acknowledge because of national security. Now, to the bulk of my presentation, and I don't have that much time. Over the past 5 years, as you know, the New York area has seen quite a few sightings of UFOs. I had been asked over and over by UFO researchers during 1983, 1984, and even into 1985, if there were any close encounter abduction type cases in the Hudson Valley. My answer to most was no. Only to a few did I admit that there was abduction cases and plenty of them. This denial of such cases was at the request of Dr. Hynek, since he wanted Night Siege to be a documentation of the many UFO reports in the Hudson Valley. Dr. Hynek also requested to keep these cases quiet until we had more data about the sightings in the area. In other words, he wanted Night Siege to be a study of UFO sightings. He wanted to keep the abductions out because it was so controversial. So we continued to collect reports. Now, one particular report involves an area over near Croton Falls, New York, and Westchester County on Route 116. This has been the site of numerous close encounters and abduction-like phenomena. The first case I want to get into very quickly here is a young fella, 22 years old, and I'm not going to mention his name, who had a close encounter on this route in 116. He had called me to tell me he had a sighting. In March of 1987, he was driving home from a friend's house along this dark, lonely road here and noticed a series of lights approaching from a nearby reservoir. He stopped the car just in time to see this enormous object pass over his car, triangular in shape with structure on the bottom. He got out. He didn't get out of his car. He had the window open. He was sitting on top of the windowsill and looking up. The next thing he remembers, he's driving. And he gets home. He's all confused. He doesn't know what's going on. He's having these anxiety attacks for some reason. And he called me to tell me about his sighting. And he said, I think something happened more. He said, I'm waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a deep sweat, and I think I'm feeling very confused. And I have a feeling that it involves more than UFOs. It has involving more to this UFO encounter than meets the eye. So I had sent him to Jean Mundy, and she did a regressive hypnosis on him. And he tells a classical story about being put on a table and having something done to the inner part of his nose and seeing these beings. And these beings were doing something to him on a table. And he was shown a control panel. And finally, he was let go. That's one particular case. And the reason why I'm showing these slides down by the reservoir, because I have another very, very similar case. And keeping this reservoir in mind, I'll read from my text. The Hudson Valley area encompasses a pretty wide area. I've been getting letters from all over the country. I've been getting many letters from the Hudson Valley area, people who think they've had abduction experiences or think they have some type of contact experience. On July 2nd, 1987, I received a call from a 36-year-old woman from Toms River, New Jersey, who I'll call Gail. Gail was very troubled on the phone and insisted she talk to me about a UFO-related experience she had. During the last part of June 1987, she was lying down in her bed. She felt somewhat uneasy and if someone was watching her. The time was 10 p.m. She then heard a voice say, "We have not come to hurt you. You will not be hurt." She then realized that her entire body was paralyzed. She's laying in her bed at her home. And the only thing that she could move was her eyes. Okay, she was laying on her back and she noticed 3 beings standing in the doorway to her bedroom. She was alone in the house at the time, but does live there with her 17-year-old daughter, who was away visiting her father in Croton Falls, New York. Gail is divorced. She says, "I saw three beings dressed in something that looked like tightly fitting jumpsuits. They stood in a single row, one behind the other. The leader, according to Gail, seemed to have problems getting into the room. It was as if some type of invisible shield was blocking his way. He lifted up his hand and pressed them against the invisible shield. His hands went down. He pulled something out of his pocket that looked like a light beam and rubbed it up and down the entrance of the hall. The light in the hall was dim, and she could not see their features. She noticed they were about 5 feet tall with very long arms. The leader then took some type of rod and pressed it, and a green light came out, and they walked into the doorway area. They were still in single file, as if the 2 creatures in back were afraid to walk in front of the other one because some type of, regulation, almost like subordinates walking behind a commander or something. Gail tried to scream, but could not. She could move only her eyes. The leader placed himself on her right side, and then one of them went to the foot of the bed, and the other to the left side of the bed. The beings on each side of her then placed their hands under her head and raised it up. She then noticed that the one on her left took a tube of what looked like a narrow roll of white cotton and started pushing it up her left nostril. At that moment, she felt extreme pain and then started to lose consciousness. She felt as if she was falling from a great height. She does not remember anything more. The next thing she recalls is waking up at 8 a.m. with a very bad headache. As she walked to the bathroom, her nose and both nostrils started to bleed. She felt as if something was stuck up in her nose, but nothing was there. She looked into the bathroom mirror and noticed her nose was swollen and puffy. She then noticed a rash on her neck, legs, and slightly on her arms. She had hoped that the experience from the last night was a dream and tried to block it out of her head. When her daughter arrived home that night, she told her about what happened. Gail told me that before she even finished with her story, her daughter started shaking and then told her that on the same night, about the same time, she and her father were followed by a UFO en route from 116 near Croton Falls in this area. She described to her mother a large dark craft, triangular in shape, that paced a car for 5 minutes above treetop level. This is probably the first report that I ever heard where someone was having a UFO experience and another member of their family was also having a UFO experience in another location. I found this report very interesting since Croton Falls is near the border of Westchester and Putnam counties in New York. And that lonely route has been the site of more than one close encounters over the past 5 years. I also find it interesting that both mother and daughter had an experience with the paranormal at the same time. There's much more to this case than meets the eye, but I'm touching on it briefly. There's a lot of problems here involving psychological problems and so on. Some years ago, I received a similar call from a woman in New Jersey who also saw a similar situation of beings coming into her bedroom, very disturbed about it, and at that time I turned that report over to Bud Hopkins, who did some research on it. Okay, the second case I would like to cover took place on July 19, 1984 during the peak of activity in the Hudson Valley. The sighting involved a close encounter, missing time, and abduction. If this was a real experience, then the implications are fantastic. In all the cases that I chose to study, all the witnesses related the truth, or what I feel they thought was the truth. There's no doubt in my mind that their stories are not hoaxes, since none of them have nothing to gain by going public. Bill, as we shall refer to him, is a 32-year-old computer programmer for a major scientific engineering corporation that helped design the major components for the new NASA Hubble Space Telescope. On July 19, 1984, at about 10:30 p.m., Bill was leaving work and heading west on Highway I-84. As he approached the Taconic Ramp in Dutchess County, New York, he noticed a very bright, almost circular object off to the north. The object seemed to be just sitting there in the sky, and the lights were very, very bright white. As he watched the object, it began to move, and it was at that time he noticed a dark mass behind it, which blocked out the brighter, light-polluted sky. He continued to drive on 84 and soon lost sight of the object. He then brushed off the entire incident in his mind and thought, oh, those must be those guys flying those planes in formation trying to fake a UFO that he heard about, which I found very amusing. He then turned off to Route 52 near Stormville, New York, and began traveling north. The time was now close to 11 p.m., and the roads were quite desolate. He came to a clearing where there was a large field and noticed a large dark mass sitting in the field about 200 yards from the road. At first he thought that it was a new home, but he knew there was no house there since he just drove there last night and the field was empty. As a matter of fact, Bill drove that way every night and never saw a house there. Bill slowed down the car. This thing was huge and dark, he said. The strange thing was, it was almost the same shape as a big barn, but it seemed more tapered towards the sides and very smooth. As he watched the dark object, it rose into the air without a sound. This really upset Bill, since he was the only car on the road. The object then rose higher and higher into the sky. All that Bill could see was this dark mass about 200 yards from them rising slowly in the air without a sound. It was now about twice as high as the trees, and it moved slowly towards Bill, who was still in the car. Bill's radio then started to sound, quote, funny. He said that the music on the radio sounded like a tape player with very weak batteries. The voices and the music sounded out of tune. I have another report like that from New Milford from May 26, where an object very low passed over a car with a dog and two individuals, and the radio also sounded very, very funny as the object passed over. And the dog was reacting, obviously, to the UFO passing overhead, and that was the same night that that particular photograph, the Christmas ring, was photographed, the Christmas tree light ring. That's a colorful photograph. Okay, now back to Bill's story. Bill then put his car into gear and sped away from the object. His heart was racing as he drove up the road about 50 miles an hour. Bill then lost sight of the object and continued to drive at a much slower rate. After several minutes, he noticed a glow up ahead on over the hill. As he approached the crest of the hill, there the object was. It was about 300 feet above the trees. It was all lit up with rows of white and yellow lights. He then stopped his car and turned off the engine and the lights of his car. He was hoping that whoever was in the thing would not see him. The object then turned off all its lights, and he could see this huge dark mass slowly drifting towards him just above treetop level. The object passed right over his car. He could not see the shape. It was triangular. Bill told me, I don't want to make light of this, but the ship looked like one of the Star Destroyers in Star Wars. The underside was the same shape, although I did not see the top. The object passed over Bill. As he looked up and saw circular areas underneath the UFO. These circular areas seemed to be like tunnels leading into the object. Inside these circular tunnels was a white flashing light, similar to the flashing of a white strobe light. We've had several reports of this where people who've had close encounters in the Hudson Valley, when they got right underneath, they saw these circular objects, and they said there was some type of flashing inside, almost like mechanisms were moving of some sort. At no time there was any sound. He estimated the size of the object to be about 300 feet from end to end. Then something strange took place. The last thing Bill remembers is watching it go over his car. He did not see it leave. The next thing he knows, he's at the bottom of the hill, 600 feet from the position he was, and the UFO was gone. He He was not sure what time it was when he watched the object pass over his car, but he feels it was most likely about 11:30 p.m. The time now was 12:15. He started his drive home upset with a very stiff neck. When he arrived home, he told his wife about the sighting. He was worried. She was worried to begin with since he was almost an hour late. Bill woke up yelling in the middle of the night, saying, "Get away from me." His wife said that the nightmares continued for a while, at least twice a week. Bill told me that he was not sure of what the nightmare was, but he knew it had to do something with the UFO sighting that he had. In the dream, he felt that something was after him. As time went on, Bill was afraid to drive at night alone. He even had to insist to his boss not to put him on the evening or night shift of his job. This is how severe it got. Finally, Bill wanted to find out more about the experience of the UFO and the fearful dreams. It wasn't until, I think later on, he saw Bud on the TV show and decided to talk to somebody about it. And he wanted to know if he can be hypnotized. And I said, well, you know, there are a number of people who do it, and you know, but it's a very iffy thing. And, well, the meat of the matter is that he was hypnotized. And I have a transcript of his hypnosis, which was done by someone who lives in the area, in the Connecticut area, who just does hypnosis as a, you know, kind of like a hobby, but seems to be very, very good. And the copy of the tape goes like this, and it's not saying that I accept Bill's story as the absolute truth, but Bill is actually relating something that he feels is the truth. Whether or not it was a real experience remains to be seen. But there's one thing that's for sure. Bill had a UFO sighting, and whatever nightmares he had or dreams were triggered by this UFO sighting. He says, he goes back to the time when he's in the car. He said, I see the thing. It's coming in my direction. I'm going to turn off my lights. Maybe they won't see me and go away. It's huge. Oh my God, what is it? There's someone standing in the road. He is now walking towards the car. Who are you? He's saying something to me. Don't be fearful. We need you. You have been selected, which you hear quite a bit. He said, selected for what? Get away. He says, I feel strange, like I'm floating in the air, and it's all dark. I'm now on this table, and these guys are all around me, 6 of them. 2 of them are at my head, 2 at my sides. My legs and arms are like dead weights. I can't move. Bill is then asked on the tape to describe them. He says, these guys are small, large heads with round eyes. The eyes are all black. I can see no pupils in them. They remind me of shark's eyes. He said, they don't even seem real. He says, they are dressed in some type of black and white skin-type suits. He says, I can't see their hands. The one at my head is moving some type of device that looks like a portable car vacuum cleaner up and down. He said, it vibrates my entire head. It feels like a drill going through my head. He yells, stop, it hurts. He tells me that they are looking for something and found it. He says, I now can feel my legs and arms. They are allowing me to get up. They are very small, only about to the bottom of my chest. Bill is 6 foot 1 inches. The others are now over some type of panel. 2 of them are leading me by the arms. He says, I asked them, where are you from? And he says, we are from here. And he says, I don't understand that. And he said, he's told, in time you will understand that. He then asked the being, well, why are you here? And the being responds to him, he is told that they need us because they have trouble living in our world. He said they come from a place which is very ugly, and when compared to our world, they would rather live here, but they can't. I told him that I would remember and tell everyone about this. He said I would remember in time, but there are, and I don't understand this, but there are forces in your own, question mark, which will stop you from telling anyone about his experience. Bill then found himself back in the car. Bill now recalls every aspect of the experience. It was a very real experience to him. Now, right now, I probably have over a dozen cases just like this. A lot of them are similar. And the cases in the Hudson Valley are increasing. I'm getting letters all the time, people claiming to have these experiences. 2 of them I've referred, 3 of them I referred to Gene Mundy. And, there are a lot more. But before I, go forward with sending them to Gene or doing some research with people I'm involved with hypnosis, I do a pretty extensive investigation into their sighting and who they are before we go any further into this. But in months to come, I'll probably have more information on this. My position on the abductions is that whether it's real or not is unimportant. It's part of the UFO phenomena. Whether or not it's a psychological effect from having a UFO sighting, or whether or not it's real, it should be studied. And of course, Bud Hopkins, Bud has done all the pioneering work in this, and we owe him a lot of credit, because if it wasn't for his work, I don't think a lot of people in the field nowadays would look at abductions the way they do. He's laid down probably the backbone of a lot of research that's going to come into the future. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll answer any questions for a few minutes if you have any questions. Do I have time for any questions?
We can take about 5 minutes worth of questions and repeat the questions.
Okay, 5 minutes worth of questions. Then I want to show the videotape from Brewster.
On the videotape, which I saw a couple of years ago, the couple that used the amateurs with their video camera, and I mentioned to you there's a red light that moves. Do you ever finally see that red light that leaves the craft? It looks like a red dot. Maybe you have it on here again. But you said you didn't see it. You have time to know what that is?
Yes, and I did see it. There's a red light, and there's 2 of them, as a matter of fact, as the videotape goes on. They seem to arc up from the object. Yes. We've had that looked at and slowed it down. One of the problems is that the image on there is so faint that when you still the videotape or try to get a still of it, you practically lose the light source. But according to the way it moved, it indicates that whatever it is was making some type of strange arc into the object. And that's another strange aspect that has been brought out later after the videotapes have been shown about 100 times. People finally saw it, including yourself.
Thank you, Bill.
Question, please.
Here.
Question, please.
Have you spoken to the DJ from WICC in Bridgeport that conducted that radio interview for about an hour that was getting dozens of calls bid from the roof of ICC in Bridgeport?
Have I spoke to the DJ at WICC in Bridgeport about the recent sightings? They were seeing the UFO from the roof of the building, right? I had some information on that. I haven't talked to the DJ himself, but I've had some information about what people were seeing. And initially, the reports that I got indicate that they could have been looking at Mars. But I'm not sure.
What do you think about this report, which is connected to the alternative theory, and which has been published in the World News paper this morning, about a UFO base on an Apache reservation in eastern New Mexico, where supposedly they are doing a great deal of experimentation with the permission of several heads of government, and it is super secret, simply because these people, these powerful people, feel that this planet is soon going to become uninhabitable, and they are cooperating with the UFO, with the extraterrestrials, in producing a transitional humanoid which can live in other planets. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of the story, and what she's talking about are secret bases of aliens in certain places around the country, and our government knows they're there, they're saying, and This was made popular probably by a fellow by the name of John Lear, who has produced quite a bit of material on this. And it sounds like a good science fiction story, but I don't see really any evidence. I've heard the stories and it sounds good. I mean, it sounds plausible. But the story goes is that there's this alien intelligence that is trading technology secrets with our government, and our government's allowing these abductions to take place to do whatever they want to do. And somebody's going to look at that script and write a heck of a science fiction story out of it. But I see no real evidence that this is going on.
But this is connected, they believe, with all of these cows that have been mutilated and parts of them have been...
Excuse me, if you would save your question until this evening when we have a more open-ended discussion forum, I am sure people here would also like to comment on that. I'm trying to adhere to the schedule, and we have a brief videotape to show. This is of the craft at Brewster.
And we had a question down here. I think it was some...
The only one time that my daughter and I saw a UFO was over Zero Wire, Syosset, Long Island, New York. Is there any significance to that? You mentioned the other one being over a electrical building.
You had a sighting over Syosset, Long Island, over a...
Zero Wire.
Is that a power plant or...
Yes.
Okay.
Big one.
Well, we know that UFOs have been around these places for a long time. There might be. There's an organization out in Long Island right now that is collecting UFO reports of things that happen in that area. There could be significance. I mean,
Why would it be on that so close to this plant?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
Okay.
I mean,
Thank you.
UFOs are seen around nuclear power plants, and I don't know why.
Let's make that the last question.
Okay, that has to be the last question because we're running short on time. We're going to show the Brewster videotape, July 24th, 1984, and it's probably one of the best nighttime video that has survived for the last 5 years, 4 years. How long is this? It's about 2.5 minutes.
Back people, that's like
You push it back a little.
back a little bit.
Thank you.
Will the audio come out on it? All right. It is.
He's bringing the back.
I just hope I got it on the right part of the tape.
Hanging up there, too.
All right, it'll come on. Now, I want you to notice something in the initial part of this tape, the pulsations of the light.
There it is. It's very, very bright. Now, a few of them. One, two, three, four, five. Yep, and there's a red one tailing.
That's the seventh one.
Yep. One, two, three, four, five. The first five are white. The sixth one, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The seventh, no, there's 8.
Yeah, I see it, all right.
All right, the first 6 are white. They're heading south-southwest. The next one behind them looks reddish, and then the one tailing way behind is red also. And now I'm going to lose him behind the pine tree.
It goes behind the pine tree and he loses it. When it emerges, it changes. I think the tracking's off on the others.
Oh, good God.
the same night that it was seen over Indian Point, hovering for some time.
Oh, you bumped into me. Oh, they're getting too far away. Damn it, I wish I was on the roof.
Those lines aren't originally in the tape. There must be something on the machine.
Yeah, whatever is in the back is flashing red. It won't come out on video, though, you know, the colors.
There it is.
This time there's more than them before. Whatever it is. All right, they're still traveling southwest, and I'm going to lose them now because, first of all, they're getting farther away, and therefore they're getting dimmer. And secondly, I'm going to lose them because I'm not standing on the roof.
There's another copy of the tape that comes on right after this, which is a better quality.
Okay, they're gone.
Okay, it'll come on again. Okay, this is,
Hanging up there, too.
okay, better quality.
Is this taken from the original tape?
Yes. The original is in the custody of the owner who took this picture, and as far as I hear, there's a UFO special coming on October 14th. They showed an interest of having this tape completely digitized by computer, live on the show. So.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, and there's a red one tailing.
That's the seventh one.
Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 5 are white. The sixth one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The seventh, no, there's 8.
Yeah, I can see it, all right.
All right, the first 6 are white. They're heading south-southwest. The next one behind them looks reddish, and then the one tailing way behind is red also. And now I'm going to lose them behind the pine tree. Oh, good God. I don't know. I'm going to tell you something. I don't know what the hell it is. They're still heading south.
July 24th, 1984, when this tape was taken, was one of the largest numbers of sightings in the Hudson Valley. The greatest amounts of sightings were reported that night.
Oh, you bumped into me.
Yeah.
They're getting too far away. Damn it, I wish I was on the roof. I hope so. Yeah, whatever is in the back is flashing red. It won't come out on video, though, you know, the colors. This time there's more than them before. Whatever it is. All right, they're still traveling southwest, and I'm going to lose them now because, first of all, they're getting farther away, and therefore they're getting dimmer. Secondly, I'm going to lose them because I'm not standing on the roof of my house.
That's it. If I play the tape more, I think there's a Chuck Norris movie on after that. I don't know if you want to see that, but...
I've got it here to the schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take...
That's a UFO, all right. That's over Long Island. And good evening. Welcome to the Joel Martin Show. We'll be talking tonight in a serious way about further reports of UFO sightings over Long Island. Now, we did this last season. In the spring and during the summer, the program was rerun, and we had a huge response. You'll meet the chairman and co-chairman, respectively, of the Long Island UFO Network. They're good people, serious people. When they here in the spring, they were behind special effects, a computer-generated special effects, so that you could not identify them. They've come out from behind the curtain, so to speak. You'll see their faces tonight in just a moment, John Ford and Richard Stout. Later, you'll meet two people who I will introduce only as Edith and Earl. And they witnessed a UFO over what would, in general terms, be described as the Carmack area. We have a rendering, an artist sketch of that sighting, and they'll tell us their story in detail as they witnessed that UFO this last winter. Now, we'll talk with John Ford and Richard Stout, chairman and vice chairman of the Long Island UFO Network, and talk about the video we just saw, as well as what they believe are UFO links to animal mutilations. And if the phone works, in a little while we'll be going to Colorado to speak with a national expert on that subject, Linda Moulton Howe, who produced an award-winning film on cattle animal mutilations called A Strange Harvest several years ago. But let me ask you first, when you were here in the spring, we did that computer graphic that looks like a mosaic, so nobody could identify either of you. But here you are, nice-looking fellows, both of you, but now we see who you are. Why are we seeing you now, but then last spring you were afraid to show your faces?
Well, Joe, we've been keeping the area of Moriches Bay under constant observation because of reports of objects that have been observed over there. We've decided when we first made our first appearance on your show to come on behind the screen to keep our identities secret. We didn't want to be spotted from where we were keeping our observations and what our activities were. This is why we kept our identities confidential. The last several months have been very fruitful for our organization. We've captured several significant objects over the Moriches Bay area.
Now, that video we just saw, was that one of them?
That's one of them.
We've never shown that before here.
That's never been shown
That's not the
before.
one we saw last spring, for those people to remember that program. Where was this taken? We'll probably get a clip of it again as soon as we can get that video racked up.
This was taken Webby's Beach in Santa Moriches.
That was taken in Santa Moriches when, Richard?
Yes, July 4th, approximately 9 p.m. in the evening.
July 4th. Now, somebody who's a cynic or a skeptic would say, you guys were seeing fireworks. It's not a pyrotechnic display.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, when I was on the beach with my video camera because we wanted to go down and take pictures of the fireworks that night. And the beach was crowded with people, and all of a sudden I heard a bunch of people saying, "What's that giant light over there? What is that?" And I looked at it and says, "Oh my," so let me get a picture of this. And it was whitish amber in color, was moving very slowly, there was no sound, and it reflected on the water as a small moon would. But this was taken in the southwest. The moon would normally raise in the east, if I'm correct. And so it couldn't be that, and it was moving very, very slowly.
Now, explain to people, because I think it bears some explanation, that you regularly go down with a video camera to record UFOs, if there are any. And I went with you on one such opportunity. I think it was the beginning of the summer. It was after that first program, I guess, yes?
Yes.
It's hard for me to remember dates. The time goes so quickly. But we did go during the summer with you. And where were we? Down in Moriches Bay again?
Yes.
That night it was pretty cold, even though it was already summertime. And that night, there wasn't anything. So I learned and I watched quietly that you guys were credible, because you didn't try to cover up and you didn't try to say, well, I saw something. Hey, some nights you do, some nights you don't. Most nights you probably don't. But on that particular night, July 4th, you did see what you believe to be, by definition, a UFO. You could not identify it. It was flying.
Yes.
Obviously, it's in the sky. It's an object.
We had Dick Rule, noted UFO investigator, take a look at this tape, and he could not identify the object. We examined it very closely, stop frame analysis on the object. We could not determine if it was a mast light of a sailing boat.
Yes.
We didn't notice any boat wake underneath the object. A certain portions of the film you will actually see the water. There's no wake.
So you could not determine if it was a boat, or all indications about boating tell you that it was not a boat?
It was not. It was not a mast light on a sailing boat.
It was not a mast light. They do have them, and I mean, obviously on Mauritius Bay you're facing what, Fire Island? The end of Fire Island.
Point.
Smith's Point, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been a plane, obviously, and it's certainly no pyrotechnic display.
There was nothing.
A reflection, perhaps, in the camera?
There was nothing underneath, no wake, and there was no lights. Usually there would be lights on a boat.
Now, Dick Rule, who people will know if they listen to me on radio for years, and will be back on NYG with him again, as I am now weekly, and as well has been on TV with us a number of times, has worked for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization as a UFO investigator expert for many, many, many years. So a lot of people will remember the name, those people who followed us. What did he say? Did he come to any conclusion at all?
He could not determine what the object was.
Not at all. But he dismissed, too, it being a boat or a plane.
He said it was something
during the course of that tape, if I may add too, Joe, we have gone over that tape repeatedly. We even had a professional cameraman look at it. He couldn't determine what it was. The object will glide along the shoreline and then stop, hover momentarily, and then reverse its direction and go back.
Really? So the direction, the way it would travel, the way it stops, the way it moves and then quickly departs, all of these things are not typical. They don't fall into the category of conventional craft, aircraft. And it's not a mast light.
It's not a mast light.
Let me interject here for a second.
Please, we're going to go on to another video in a little while, but please, Rich, by all means.
You notice at times you'll see heat rising from a road, how it looks a little blurry.
Yes.
If you notice on a part of this tape, you'll see something like this between the object and the water. And the lights in the background would go off.
Yes.
Blink out. Everything.
Or be distorted.
Be distorted.
Right.
Interesting.
You did notice that effect underneath the object.
Interesting point. There was a tremendous response to the first time you were on here. Now, you have no fear of coming forward now and telling people who you are and what you look like and so forth?
No. Our organization is established. We are attracting a large following on the island. We're recruiting members. We have a standing staff now of 7 full-time investigators with the
And you've gotten
organization.
dozens of responses from people all over the island. Many, many responses. In fact, I want to remind people that a little later, you'll see the number on the screen. So on one of the breaks, get a pen or a pencil and keep it, because I want to encourage people, many of whom in this community have had such sightings and probably have witnessed UFOs, and like the people we'll meet in a little while from the Comac area, obviously don't know where to turn. That's the problem for most of us. So you're kind of a clearinghouse, a gathering place to begin to sort of analyze this.
We want people to know that we're there, we're a service, we are a volunteer research organization. We are in the process of incorporating as a nonprofit research corporation. If you see something, anything associated with the UFO phenomenon or something of a high strangeness, we're the people to talk to. We will believe what they see.
Now, we can talk about UFOs and analyze the film. Well, it's a video, really. The video, we can analyze that all night and tomorrow and the next day and still not really come to any conclusion. This is all fine, but now we get into a section with you of ufology, which becomes even more controversial and problematic than even UFOs. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Animal mutilations?
The animal mutilation wave that happened this year on the South Shore of Long Island.
Now, this is a January 1988 newspaper article, okay? I'm going to read just a little bit of it, and then I'm going to tell you what the conclusion was of some people, and you tell me why you think these still mysterious animal mutilations here in Suffolk County are somehow linked to UFOs, all right? This is Newsday, Thursday, January 28th, 1988. I read, it's a Mitchell Friedman byline. Dumping of animal corpses a mystery. That's the headline, okay? Quote, the sightless eye sockets of a goat's skull seemed to stare from the mud on the edge of North Dunton Avenue in North Belport yesterday, near the spot where the decayed remains of a sheep had been thrown into the woods. Maybe Freddie was around from Nightmare on Elm Street.
I doubt it.
No? One more line. It goes on to say it was the same area where 4 headless chickens had been dumped and where 4 dead puppies were found a few weeks earlier. The unlit street, which town officials say is a dumping ground for household garbage, was also where the torn body of a red fox was discovered and where a dead pit bull was thrown away, all since December 26 of 1987. Now, the last line, quoting an official in Brookhaven, quote, it could be anything from Satanism to a religious ritual to just some unrelated dumping. There was nothing at the scene to tell. That's a quote from a Brookhaven official.
Okay, first of all,
now, please.
We've had numerous people come forward to our organization concerning what happened, not only there at Dunton Avenue, but in Bohemia, East Islip, Sherger Avenue in North Bellport, Mark Lane in Brookhaven Hamlet, and on Woodland Avenue in Manorville.
Okay.
Also,
please,
too, Joe.
Please.
During an investigation of reported UFO sightings in August of this past month, we talked to a reporter with the Southampton Press, who informed us that they also had mutilated dogs discovered out in the field in Southampton.
Okay, I was going to pick up at that point and say to you that this same article from Newsday last January says, quote, there have been animal dumpings before on Long Island. One of the worst was last, if I could read it would be nice too, one of the worst was last summer, that would have been, they mean 87, when Islip Animal Shelter workers found a dozen goats, 20 chickens and 10 pigeons left alongside Brentwood Road, their heads partly severed in an apparent ritual slaughter. There were handwritten notes in the ears of some of the goats in Brentwood, and others had crosses drawn on them in blood. Now everything points to that Afro-Caribbean religious rite that they call Santeria, yes?
Well, some of these mutilations we could definitely say are connected with religious cults.
Now, the
information we gathered on what happened in January and February of this year indicates something of a high strangeness.
Yeah. Even the Newsday article says the animal dumpings in Bellport, however, well, actually it's North Bellport, I think it's around the edge of Pace Park,
yes,
which is drug-infested, but it's a whole other show. The most recent were goat carcasses, a decomposed sheep, and 3 mallard ducks. But they followed in the North Bellport discoveries of animal mutilations no clear patterns. And the cold weather at that time, we had a very cold winter last winter, made it difficult for officials, I'm quoting again from Mitch Friedman's article in Newsday, to determine just when the animals had been killed. Now, we can speculate all we want, John and Richard, but what makes you think that this is somehow, in a little while we'll look at the video, we're going to break and come right back to that video, but what makes you think that we are talking about a link between these animal mutilations, and we have some photographs here too which I'll show, and UFOs? Why would you link those two together? It's one thing to see UFOs, it's another thing to find animal mutilations. Now you're linking them.
Okay. First of all, during that period of time, we have received reports through our hotline of substantial UFO sightings along the South Shore of Long Island, going back to at least December of '87 through February through March along the South Shore in areas where some of these animals were dumped. Secondly, there are clear parallels with what happened here on the South Shore with what happened in the American Southwest during the '70s with the animal mutilations out there. These articles do not go into detail as to what really happened.
No, they don't.
We have confidential witnesses who have spoken to our organization whose identities are known to the board of directors of the Long Island UFO Network. 1. The United States federal government was involved in investigating these mutilation sites. Eyewitnesses saw government vehicles with federal license plates on them, with gentlemen in white coveralls going into the woods where these animals were dumped with radiological survey meters. Secondly, town employees who had discovered these animals were told not to talk about it. Thirdly, on Dunton Avenue, dump site number 1 that we talk about.
That's the North Bellport location.
No, this is East Patchogue.
East Patchogue,
right.
Okay.
There was a lamb discovered, as the article said. An eyewitness who discovered that animal told us the animal carcass had been turned inside out. Similar mutilations in the Southwest occurred, and also was a reported mutilation in August in Washington State where animals were discovered directly after UFO observations, turned literally inside out. One particular case in 1981 in Amarillo, Texas, a farmer went out to check on a young heifer.
I recall that one, please.
As he's walking over a ridgeline, he looks out. There is the heifer being supported between 2 humanoid creatures and carried over the ridgeline. The gentleman beat a quick retreat back to his ranch. The next day he went out with in his pickup truck with his brother-in-law and his son. They discovered the heifer, and the animal had been turned inside out.
Now, they used to say that there were UFOs seen over the ranches when animal mutilations were
And
occurring.
also photographed.
Right. And have you been out west, I assume?
No.
Have you ever traveled? Okay. But this is what I want to say. The expanse of land is huge.
Yes, it is.
You drive through Texas, start at one end and keep driving, and you'll think you're in the twilight zone that it's never going to end. It's, I mean, huge. The point being that if somebody got in with a UFO or a helicopter, they used to say these were some of the things that were related to the UFO or the animal mutilation discoveries. That's one thing, because they're very wide spread areas. You know, you could get in and out without anybody seeing you. Your next neighbor is, 10 miles, 100 miles down the road. Here, it's very crowded, is my point. How could a UFO, how could a helicopter, how could anything get in to do this without being seen?
Well,
Whole different stories.
We did have a report March 20th over Dunton Avenue. A large yellow disc was seen heading south towards the shoreline.
So there has been a UFO seen in proximity to
Dunton
these
Avenue.
discoveries.
We had one unsubstantiated report. We were not able to investigate. A 15-year-old boy in that neighborhood claims down by Gazzola Drive near the Duck Farm a red glowing object in the woods around the same time in March.
That's the point I wanted to make. I must break, but I didn't want to leave it on that cliffhanger. In other words, there have been sightings of UFOs where these things have been discovered, mutilated, similar to what was reported in the Southwest for years in the 70s until about the early 80s, yes? Then they seem to have stopped. Now they're here. All right, we'll come back, talk more about that, and I guess we'll have Linda Howe on the phone, and you'll see some video of an animal mutilation site here on Long Island, and we'll talk more about UFO sightings elsewhere and meet some of the witnesses. Right back. Of UFO sightings over Long Island, Richard Stout, John Ford. John is the chairman, Richard the vice chairman of the Long Island UFO Network. In a little while, have a pen or pencil handy, because I'm going to give you a telephone number where you can be involved with them, report either what you have witnessed as far as UFO sightings are concerned, or whatever questions you might have, and you're going to meet a couple of UFO witnesses who've had sightings right over the Comac area. In a moment, we're going to be going to Linda Moulton Howe. She is a national expert on what we're talking about right this moment, which are the animal mutilations linked to UFOs. And the late Jim Lorenzen, who was the head of the organization, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, passed away only recently, sadly, told me on a number of occasions that he believed there was a link. Now, many people felt, no, they were predatory animals, that they were, all manner of causes, satanic rituals, that these were the work of cultists, devil worshippers, wolf packs, name it, anything but UFOs. And yet there have been a lot of people who have reported out west, as they have here, you're telling me now, John, Richie, that they have seen UFOs in relationship to where these animal mutilations are seen, are reported. We're going to look at a video in just a second of one of them right here in this area.
Okay, the parallels we can draw with the Long Island mutilations, with the Western mutilations, are this. The South Shore Press bore an article back in February.
That's the Mauritius area newspaper.
Right. On the mutilations. I've talked to Brian Ward extensively. He's the editor of the paper. A lot of the animals, yes, this is an animal that was discovered just recently up in River Avenue.
Not a pretty sight.
No, it's not.
And if it's a human who's doing them, they should be shot. But
this was a dog that was photographed by Mr. Stout. And Richie, maybe you could talk about it.
This was taken by South Haven Park area off River Road. And if you notice a little bit more in the tape, you'll see that sex organs were removed.
Now, this is a characteristic, too, of what the animal mutilations were. Why don't we have Linda Howe join us and then share the conversation? Because if you're going to make comparisons between the West and Long Island, she's in Colorado right now. Linda Moulton Howe. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Linda. Thank you very much for joining us from all that distance. You, of course, produced in the early 1980s the award-winning TV film A Strange Harvest, which was about the animal mutilations linked to UFOs, the only such video documentation ever done in this country.
Yeah.
Please, can you explain to people who might be very cynical, skeptical, not knowing, what the link would be that would say, oh, here's an animal mutilation, which we won't attribute to a predatory animal or a satanic worshiper or some cultist, but instead we'll give it an extraterrestrial or UFO origin. Please.
I think it's important to give some scope on this story.
Please.
The first mutilation that occurred that made worldwide headlines was in September 1967, which was 21 years ago this month. And that was a horse found in southern Colorado. in an area south of the Sand Dunes National Park. The horse was found stripped of flesh from the neck up. There was a hematologist. He is well known now, a doctor 21 years later who has a very, very good professional name. And he was there, even took some pathology tissue from the horse, investigated it, and told me that he was shocked at finding that all of the major internal organs of the horse had been removed, including the flesh from the neck up, in an extremely clean and very precise and smooth cut, and there was not any evidence of any kind of hemoglobin from blood at all.
Well,
that is one of the hallmarks of mutilations for 21 years worldwide. This is not confined to the Southwest. This is a worldwide phenomenon.
Obviously, one could ask, we don't have a great amount of time, but one might ask why it began in 1967, certainly. But even putting that question aside, why couldn't it be attributable to someone skilled with surgical tools who in fact is a member of or a group of people who are satanic worshipers, the devil worshipers? Not to be commended, but...
Yeah, when I did A Strange Harvest, I looked into it from all of the points of view.
Okay.
Predator, cult, individuals, and the UFO story. This is what's surprised me as a journalist.
Please.
Was that as I began doing more and more interviews, I kept hearing more and more off-the-record UFO stories. People were very afraid to go on the record because they're afraid of having everybody else say that they're nuts for saying that they have seen some strange light or some strange creature on the ground in relationship to these dead animals.
So in other words, witnesses were telling you they saw some lights in the sky, always in relationship to the discovery of the mutilations.
Often in connection. And this is where the UFO factor connection with the mutilations begins, is with eyewitness accounts. Now, I do have, and this is what John was referring to, I do have a file from a rancher in Texas who in 1980 was out trying to round up some pregnant cows on a very remote part of his ranch.
This is the Amarillo story we heard before.
It's near Waco, Texas.
Okay.
And the rancher was on foot. His car was, or truck was some distance away. And as he came around a bend of some mesquite trees, he saw, these are his words, two creatures, they were not human, with heads shaped like eggs with the pointed side down and with very large slanted black eyes. They were all the same color from the top of the head through the arms, the hands to the feet. And the two, whatever they were, about 4 feet tall, were carrying a calf in between them, and he could clearly see the calf swinging with the two, we'll call them creatures because I don't know what they were, and he could see the calf swinging back and forth between them, and it scared the daylights out of him. And as he told me, he said, I did not want to be taken by any UFO. That's what the rancher said.
But you regard him as a credible witness?
Yeah, this rancher has been ranching for all of his life. He's in his late 70s
No reason
now.
why he would make that up, in other words.
I cannot imagine why anybody would make up a story like this. And in fact, there were more witnesses because he went back to his ranch house and 2 days later went back to the site with his wife and one of his sons. And at the area of the mesquite trees, he found the calf's hide minus the skeleton and minus the muscle and minus the organs. It would be like the calf but without any inside.
Now,
turned inside out and laying on the ground next to a backbone of a calf that the ribs had been removed.
Joe,
John wants
the lamb discovered on Dunton Avenue.
Is that this picture here?
Yes, the procedures done on that lamb, the animal had been skinned. Turned inside out, the organs had been removed, and the skeleton taken off the animal, and the bones neatly piled next to the animal.
So are you saying that what we'll see it right now, but what you're saying is that what you discovered here matches the descriptions Linda has given to us from the western state sightings,
Not only
even
that,
western Canada.
But the reports we received here also indicates that the majority of the animals had been drained of their blood. On Scherger Avenue, some 20 to 30 cats and dogs were found, skinned, drained of their blood, sex organs removed, and in some instances the anus had been cored and bored out. Now this photograph I think you're showing there is a mutilated deer we found up on Long Island Avenue. The animal had been skinned, it had been badly decomposed. The skin of the animal was laying some 20 feet in the woods from where the skeletal remains had been found.
Now, Linda,
Yes.
you know something about the sightings here on Long Island.
Yes, I do.
UFO and animal mutilation both. What do you make of it? Do you see a link between the two here?
Well, the whole A Strange Harvest film was a kind of journey and discovery into a mystery in which the UFO aspect got stronger and stronger with more human testimony. I would say that in 1988, there still is no hard proof that extraterrestrials from some other part of this galaxy or anywhere else are coming here and grabbing up animals and excising parts. There's no hard proof for that. But 8 years after doing a film, the mutilations have never stopped, and that's what people do not realize. The mutilations have continued every single year. I have reports, sheriff's reports, photographs of animals being found in very remote areas usually. That's what makes Long Island especially interesting to me, because it's the first time I've ever heard of an area that is close to a large population.
That's what I pointed out before. The population density here is immense, whereas out west that's not the case at all.
Yeah, and the thing is that I do not dismiss human testimony in the hundreds of reports as being crackpot. I think that there is a tremendous amount of circumstantial evidence that there is a connection between something that is very odd, comes in some kind of a light. Right. In this one case, there is a daylight sighting by a rancher of something very strange, these two creatures, whatever they were, that really, really got to that rancher. And there is a hypnosis session done with a woman who was also involved with 4 other people in Texas in 1973. The 5 of them, driving in a car, watched a light that paced their car for a good distance, and when she stopped the car to get out to watch the light more carefully, she and the other 4 people in the car suffered a phenomenon known as missing time.
Oh, yes, the Bud Hopkins book.
Yes, Bud Hopkins. If your viewers are familiar with Bud Hopkins' Missing Time,
I would think so.
A book last year called Intruders.
Yes.
I believe those are 2 extremely important books.
I agree with you.
And if those books are describing a phenomenon that is also related to what has happened to people in my own research concerning connection, in this case, the woman under hypnosis describes seeing a calf taken up in a pale beam of yellow light, and sees also gray creatures excising parts from the calf and then lowering the calf back down in the beam of light into the pasture, and when it's in the pasture it is dead, bloodless, with these parts removed.
All
now,
right,
hypnosis is not proof, but it is another piece of the puzzle.
Okay, we only have a minute, but I've got to get in a couple of points. The people who say, well, there are satanic cults, there are those who practice the Afro-Caribbean ritual of something called Santeria. Might that be an explanation, or you would reject that?
Well, not according to the law enforcement people I've talked to, because where satanic cults have killed animals, there's always blood. We're talking about bloodless and surgically excised parts, not cut with scissors, not cut with knives, and in most satanic cult rituals, they do spill blood.
This is true. Also, the method by which they do it. Some people have reported seeing helicopters near animal mutilation sites now. Could those be confused for UFOs, or might UFOs actually be confused for helicopters?
I think there are 2 things happening. I think that the UFO phenomenon is capable of camouflaging itself in any form that it wishes us to see it, which could be a helicopter. But I also believe that our own United States intelligence forces, CIA, NSA, CIA, and all, I think that they have been involved in their own surveillance of trying to track whatever has been happening in the mutilation phenomenon.
Okay. On that note, thank you very much, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, TV producer of the award-winning film about UFOs and animal mutilations called A Strange Harvest, talking to us from Colorado. John, Richard, a concluding sentence I must break here.
Okay. There was extensive helicopter activity on the South Shore by the 42nd Aviation Battalion.
There you go. I'm glad you said that before I broke, because that fits right in with that last point made. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will turn to 2 nice people who live on Long Island, who one night, lo and behold, much by surprise, witnessed a UFO over Comac. You'll see a drawing of that, and you'll hear their remarkable story when we consider further reports about UFOs over Long Island in 1 minute. Stay with us, please. we go on the Joel Martin Show tonight, talking about further reports of UFO sightings over Long Island. Now, there have been many, and people often will think, oh, if I tell anybody, they'll think I'm crazy. You are not crazy. Believe me, you are not crazy, because if you are, so are millions of other people in this world. And what do you say about a government of the United States that has kept countless files about UFO sightings worldwide, and in many cases can't explain what they are? I'm going to introduce to you a couple of people and show you an artist rendering of what they saw over Comac several months ago. And I want to read this from a recent newspaper. I quote, "In the summer of 1974, Norman Miller, then a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and now national editor of the Los Angeles Times, was told by then Governor Reagan of California," that's Ronald Reagan, "about his having sighted an unidentified flying object on a flight in his private plane. Reagan had convinced his pilot to follow the object, which was heading toward Bakersfield, California, but then Mr. Reagan told Miller it went straight up." And he told his wife about it, and it goes on to talk a little bit about UFOs in the context of President and Mrs. Reagan's experiences. Now, surprising? No, I don't think so, because so many people have had sightings of things they can't explain that by its most conservative definition, if you can't identify it and it's flying and you see it, it's a UFO, an unidentified flying object. Having said that, meet Edith and Earl. We'll protect their identity with only the first names, not give the last name. Once upon a time, back in when?
Well, this is the second week of February.
Cold, February 1988.
Very cold, but it was a very clear, crisp night.
Now, we spoke at some length privately, and I think I asked you on the phone, what the heck were you doing, if you'll forgive me, looking at the sky on such a cold night? You should be watching television.
Yeah, no, I had been watching television. Johnny Carson had just come on, and I said to my husband, oh, I'll set my hair while the monologue's on so I can come back and see the guests. So I went into our guest bathroom, which is right by the front door of our house. And while I was in there setting my hair, I'm looking into the mirror, which is not a medicine cabinet. It's just a mirror on the wall. And it started to vibrate. And I could feel also on the sink it started to vibrate. And the man across the street every once in a while brings home a big tractor-trailer truck. And when he comes up the hill, it sometimes vibrates the house because it's a huge truck. Mm-hmm. But the mirror kept vibrating so violently, and I kept feeling it in my feet and against the sink. I'm thinking, what the heck does he have in that truck that could make the house vibrate so much? So I went out of the bathroom, opened the front door, and there wasn't even a light. There wasn't a headlight. So I figured, well, he must have parked in the court, which is across the street.
You went out in the cold night?
And no, I could see the court because there aren't any leaves on the trees in February. So I could see the court, and the court was empty. Mm-hmm. And I have a street light out in front. And there was nothing. There wasn't even a car passing by. Well, then the vibration, I could still feel a vibration in my feet, so I just had socks on. I was in my bathrobe, pajamas, and a pair of socks on my feet. But it was such a vibration that I went outside because I'm thinking, what the heck is it? And I'm looking, I can't see anything. And the vibration is still there. And then I look down the opposite end of the block, and over the houses, I see red lights, and it tilt upward and was coming towards the house, and the vibration was still going on. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, an earth tremor, because I didn't see anything at first. And I ran in the house to get him because I didn't know what I was looking at. So he came out and he says, well, it's got to be helicopters.
That cold night you went out that way?
Yeah, I was freezing. Well, he came out and he wanted to know what the heck I was doing out in the freezing cold. I said, well, didn't you feel, because I went into him and I said, don't you feel that vibration? Uh-huh. And he says, yeah, isn't it a low-flying plane? I says, I don't know what it is. I said, it's got a whole bunch of red lights, but I can't see anything else. I mean, there were no blinking lights on it.
In other words, you looked straight up, and all you could see was a round
blackness and a round circle of red lights.
Now we have an artist rendering of what you saw.
Yeah.
And that'll be on the screen, I guess, momentarily, and then people will know exactly. There you go. If you look at the monitor, Edith.
Yeah, right. That's from underneath.
That's from underneath. Now imagine you're looking up at the sky and you're looking at it from underneath.
Yeah.
You can see the stars in the sky, the red lights around, but you could not see through.
You could not see through.
And it was a clear night.
The middle. And it was a very clear, crisp night. There were plenty of stars out. Mm-hmm. But I could not see stars through the middle. He couldn't see stars through the middle. Because at first he said, well, it's a bunch of helicopters flying in a round formation somehow. I said, well, then they couldn't be that close together.
The blades
would tangle.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd still be able to see stars somewhere in the middle.
What did you think, Earl? What did you think you were looking at? I agree with Edith. It doesn't seem possible they could be helicopters.
UFO didn't even come to my mind. I look up, I didn't know what I was looking at. And it was a strange thing, and I just dismiss it because I only hear of UFO on the west, on the desert, or strange places, not on Long Island.
Long Island's pretty strange.
Well,
yes.
There's got to be a whole mess of helicopters.
Sure.
And but then after, it dawned on me after when she meant it couldn't be because there was no flashing light like helicopters have that we later have found out.
In other words, it didn't appear to be conventional.
Well, a lot of helicopters and planes fly over, because we're near MacArthur Airport. I mean, it's not that far away.
Good point.
So you have planes, a
Gotta
lot
check
of
that
helicopters going over. So, I mean, I know what a helicopter looks like.
Right. And would you know planes flying in close formation, but they wouldn't fly in a round formation?
Well, see, this is what I thought at first. Well, maybe he's right. It's a bunch of helicopters. But it was moving very slowly. And even though it was moving slowly, none of the lights went out of place. I mean, if it was helicopters, they couldn't have kept that
That's
complete
very
circle.
precision.
They couldn't have kept the circle.
Formation, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
More drifting away, like
What about the size and the speed, its trajectory, to use the fancy word? What direction it was going? And
Well, it wasn't going that fast. I could have
slowly.
taken my car, I think, and drove over
Faster than it was going.
to Betts Highway, say, and caught up with it.
It was going west to east.
Well, it was to me, it was heading towards MacArthur,
would
that
be-
direction.
Well, that would be going from Comac, would be west to east.
It was
right?
coming over us, and then it would have gone over Betts
I have
Highway.
a rotten sense of direction.
Yeah, I
It
do
seems
too.
to me it would be, it's going from west to east. It's going further out east in Suffolk
Yeah,
County. Okay,
yeah.
fine. And could you estimate its size? Pretty big?
Football field, I would say.
Football field?
Yeah, tremendous size.
It was
around
huge.
it, yeah.
And then it took off where it just sort of faded out.
No, it didn't go fast at all. It was going very slow. As I said, I could have taken my car. If I had been dressed, I could have taken my car and gone, I think, to maybe Betts Highway.
I understand.
And
But
caught up with it.
How
I mean,
did you eventually lose sight of it? It just disappeared
It
into
just
the
kept
horizon?
on going.
Okay.
It didn't change shape. It didn't, it just kept on going. And it was not a helicopter sound, but it was like a low
distant thunder.
roaring. There was a roaring sound.
Another important question.
Yeah.
Was it the sound that you would typically associate with a helicopter?
No.
No,
It was a
not
roar.
in any way. It
More
was
of a
more
roar.
like a distant thunder. You hear it in a distant, this heavy vibrations.
Yeah. The vibration was
Right.
still there. I mean, as it was
The house.
going over.
Yeah.
Now, you live, I don't know your house or your neighborhood,
Yeah.
but I mean, you have neighbors on either side or
Yeah.
across the street?
And I kept saying nobody else is coming out. I
Yeah,
kept
right.
looking around like, why
The
aren't they
obvious
coming
point.
out?
Why didn't the others come
I
out?
don't know. The only thing I can think of is because I was in that downstairs bathroom. A lot of people, most of them get up very early for work in the morning.
And they don't wanna go out on a
assuming
cold
they were
February
probably
night, huh?
upstairs. Most of them have. I have a TV upstairs too, but we happen to be downstairs watching in the den.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are upstairs in their bedrooms at that hour watching TV.
Right, and probably just ignored
And
the
maybe if
rumbling
they
as
heard
a
it, they would
truck
have thought
going
what
by.
he did. I mean, unless I came in, he wouldn't have come out either.
This is a good point.
But the mirror, that's what threw me. I knew it couldn't have been the truck then because
Right.
it was vibrating too much.
Too bad you didn't get a photograph of it, but you were able to describe it eventually.
Yeah, and I had my son had given me a camera for my birthday, which was the week before,
Yes.
and I had just put film in it, sitting on the dining room table, but I was so surprised at seeing that. I never even thought of the camera.
That is a pity, but at those moments, who thinks that clearly
Yeah.
of those things? Remarkably, though, it didn't. You saw it that one time, but it didn't come back again.
No.
Never did come back.
I mean, I haven't seen it again.
No, but did you ever talk to the neighbors? I mean, subsequently, did either of
Well,
you
the
speak to
one
the people
fellow
in the
came
neighborhood?
across.
You found somebody else.
No,
Did you see it?
he just came across and asked if we had seen anything because John had come to the house to, interview me and Erling, and he just came over because he saw a whole bunch of people and then they had flyers, putting in
okay.
mailboxes to see if anybody else saw it. That he came over and he just said to my husband, did you see something? And he said, yes, a while back. And he said, oh, and walked
And
home.
walked away as if
Never
he had.
said
Okay.
any more about it.
All right, let me break here. We'll come back, and John, you pick up the story of when you met Edith and Earl, and we'll do that about the Comac UFO sighting in just a minute. Stay with us, please. All right. Imagine looking straight up at the sky on a cold February night and seeing, as you looked skyward, this round-shaped, solid object, glowing red lights, and an otherwise clear, cold sky. That's what Edith and Earl saw on a cold February night in 1988. And then apparently nobody else would come forward, despite their pleas in the neighborhood, to say they saw it, or perhaps nobody else did see it, because it's not the kind of night late. It was about 11:30 at night.
It was quarter to 12 o'clock, yeah.
Right after Johnny Carson's monologue.
Monologue, yeah.
All right. And you eventually were able to find John and Richard and the Long Island UFO Network.
Yes, well, I happened to be flipping the channels one night, and I saw him on the TV, and you said you were going to put the number on.
Yes,
you know, so,
which I'm going to do here again.
Yeah, so then I said, well, finally, I said to my husband, we finally have somebody we can call and ask, because I looked through the phone book. I couldn't find anything where I could call.
Millions of people report these, Earl. Millions of people tell you about these sightings, literally. Hundreds of thousands of documents and reports surface.
And we just figured, too, if we called the police or the airport, they'd think we were crazy, you know, or crank calls or something, you know, at that hour at night.
But you found out you weren't so crazy. John, jump in and tell me about Phil Imbrogno's picture.
On May 26th this year, in Southbury, Connecticut, over I-84, an object was observed hovering over the highway. Its altitude was anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 feet. The distance was at anywhere from 2 to maybe 5 miles away.
Similar to their size
similar
and
to their
shape
observation. Now,
same speed, etc.
Take this drawing of the object here, and the photograph we can't show on TV for the simple reason we're showing it to a number of our witnesses, and we don't want to prejudice their observations.
This was when in Connecticut? What time of year?
May 26.
May of 1988, over southern Connecticut.
Yes. Now, the object, what the photograph will portray is sort of like a half a crescent.
Hold it up to the camera.
Half a crescent of the object. And it's multicolored lights.
As if you were looking at that same object, but on an angle rather than straight up.
Right.
What you're saying.
Now, the object totally blends in, save for the multicolored lights with the night sky.
You see nothing else but those lights. I saw the picture.
Now, I showed, before the start of this show, Edith and Earl the photograph, and they said that, save for the multicolored lights, the spacing of the lights are the same with the object that they observed in February down here.
All right. Now, there was a similarity, in other words, between Phil Imbrogno's, the UFO researcher's picture from Connecticut last May and what they saw over Comac last February.
Yes. Now, I may add also, too, we went in June of this year to conduct an investigation into the area near where they observed this by their house. We were not able to find any other witnesses. But unfortunately, I think it's because of the time of the observation that nobody came out to look to see
almost
what caused
midnight,
this vibration.
bitter cold. Who the heck goes out on those kind of nights? And yet, if you look during the day at the area nearby where it was seen, it's a wide open area.
Yeah, well, that's the schoolyard right across the street. There's houses in front of that. There's houses right directly across, and then behind the houses across from us is a big schoolyard.
Which I'm going to show.
And it seemed to come up over the houses.
It came up over those houses.
Yes.
Possibility is that it could have been hovering close to the ground by that schoolyard.
Yeah.
The yard.
Because I heard the vibration. I felt the vibration.
What a lovely thought that it came straight up.
I felt the vibration a long time before I saw it.
Now, when well, obviously you didn't see it go straight up, but it reminds me of that piece I read before from President Reagan's sighting. Remember, he said he followed it, but it went straight up. You only saw it going across.
I saw it come up over the houses.
Right. You saw it come up, and then so it did come up over the houses. And here again, let me take this one down, and you can see this one, and it would. There's the school. Now it would come up over and then move out, like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, we conducted a radiological survey of the area, which did not indicate any radiation, but just on our examination of the yard, it was more than ample space there to accommodate an object.
My next question. That's why I wanted to show the photograph, even though it's just a simple snapshot, to show that that area, you say large as a football field, Earl, I mean, this object could have come down there if, in fact, it did. There wasn't enough room.
Yes.
It wasn't one of those streets where most of us live in. There's not enough room to park your car.
Yeah, well, see, it was vibrating a long time because I didn't go right out the minute I felt the vibration. I'm assuming it's a truck coming up, so I'm waiting a while, and it was just getting so strong that I finally, like, ripped open the door. I was really going to yell and say, what the heck do you have in that truck? I mean, my whole house is going to fall down. And I was so amazed when it was dark out there. There was no headlights, you know.
All right, so it comes up over the houses. It's got enough room to hover because it's an area where there's a schoolyard. Then it moves. Now, what about the Connecticut one last May, did it move at a similar speed? Was it, again, moving slowly?
The object is hovering over the road.
Similar to their sighting.
This object was immense. It was determined from computer analysis of the photograph that the reason it was a half crescent was that there was a dome blocking out the rear portion of the lights.
But it was moving slowly.
It was just hovering in the sky.
Hovering in the sky. Well,
the object was there, and it just blinked out, turned its lights off, and it was gone.
Yeah.
Now, there was over 100 witnesses to this site in Connecticut.
Now,
the photograph was taken by an off-duty Connecticut state trooper.
Now, what time of day was that there?
It was about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
See, and already the weather was warmer and it was earlier and you're over an interstate. Now, I'm not apologizing, I'm not defending, I'm just saying there are...
I may add something else here that the public here on Long Island may not be aware of. Similar-sized objects have been reported in excess of 1,000 feet over Long Island. We have received
similar shape, similar light configuration, similar
light
speed,
configurations. We have reports going back now at least 5 years of objects of immense size over Long Island.
All right, I'm going to let that statement sit right there because it...
Worldwide UFO is a non-profit public information center. It is our intent and purpose to keep the general public informed via the home video recorder as to the UFO phenomena. We work off donations only. Minimum donation per videotape is $20. This money is used to purchase tapes, recording equipment, mailers, office supplies, postage, wages, and other related expenses. No rights are given or implied. Our goal is to give the public more video information on UFOs. All tapes are re-recorded under the Fair Use Doctrine. If you have any videotapes dealing with the subject of UFOs or the unexplained and would like to donate them or trade them one-on-one, we would like to add them to our list, the original tape returned to you. We feel that with the use of these UFO-related videotapes and your support, we can meet the public demand for this type of information. Thanks to all of you who have donated shows and funds to keep us going. If you have not already done so, send today for our free tape list. Our goal is to stock every UFO tape ever made.